Let's style all H1s across our site by affecting the all H1 tag. So if we add a new H1 to our page, it's going to have the correct styles without having to apply any classes. This isn't the first section on the page though, so it needs to be tagged as an H2 for SEO and screen readers, but we want it to look like an H1. So we can create an H1 class and give it all the same styles that our H1 tag has, giving it the same weight, the same size, and the same line height. Now if we apply that H1 class on top of our H2, it mostly looks correct. We'll see that our H2 actually has some letter spacing and a text transform applied. So even if we don't need those styles on our H1, we still need to zero them out and on all our other headings across our site. That way when we apply this class on top anything, it always has the correct styles. Now if we check out the code that Webflow is writing for us, it's pretty long. For each of our heading tags, it's repeating the same font family, the same font weight, and we're having to do that over and over again, clearing out all the styles and doing the exact same thing on all the classes. Aside from just making our code longer though, it also makes it harder to maintain. If we want to change the font family across all our headings, we would have to change it here and then change it to the new weight and do the same thing for each of the classes and each of the tag versions. Also, if there's some similarities, like a couple of these headings have 1.2 line height and we want to change every instance to 1.3, that has to be done manually because these aren't reusable styles. These are the main issues that Lumos addresses. When a Figma designer is working with Lumos, they can apply a font style like this H1 font style. It's made up of other reusable styles like a font family, a font weight, a line height, and a letter spacing. On certain headings, the designer may choose to override the default properties, whether it be its font family or maybe its letter spacing or its text transform. As a developer, we can click Inspect and see all the styles that were applied to this element. So it has a font style 1, a letter spacing 0, and text transform 1. So when building this out, we can give it the font style 1 utility class, and it has a default letter spacing and text transform in that utility. But we can override the default by saying letter spacing 0, and we can override the default text transform with text transform 1, and now it matches what was set in Figma. So to get started with Lumos, let's upload the fonts for our project and hit open. We're going to remove the weight and only use the name of the font itself. Otherwise, Webflow would treat each of these as separate fonts when they're really all the same font, just with different weights. So we're using 400, 500, and 700 weights. So in Webflow, let's open our custom code in the typography embed, and at the top are all our variables. These are used to create our different text styles. So if we change this in one place, it'll update everywhere it's being used. When we uploaded our fonts, we noticed we had a 400, 500, and 700 weight. Also, if we hop over to Figma, we'll notice line height 4 has been changed to 90%. So in Webflow, all we have to do is change line height 4 to 0.9 for our 90%. Now letter spacing 1 in Figma, we'll notice is -3%. So to set that in Webflow, we'll change it from -0.06 to 3 instead. And then we also have our font families. So our design calls for 2 font families. We'll add another font family variable here and change it to FF2. Font family 1 should be our body and paragraph font family, and it needs to match the way we named the font when we uploaded it to Webflow. Font family 2 will be our heading font family, and we'll set that there. Now our text transforms can stay the same for every project, and once we have these variables set up, we can use them to create our different heading styles. So you'll notice our heading 3 here, this one block of code handles both the H3 tag and the class from one place. So if we adjust the font weight for one, it'll update for both. Now if we head down to the bottom, these are all the utilities we can use to override our default text styles. And since we added a new font family, let's create a new font family utility. We'll call this FF2 and set FF2 right there. So if we go ahead and save this and we scroll down to our project, we'll go ahead and click on this card and duplicate it, and we'll change this to be FF2, and we'll apply an FF2 class to this text here. So next, let's set our default font styles. We're selecting all our heading tags and classes, our body and paragraph, and we're giving everything a default text transform, letter spacing, line height, weight, and family. This would be the same as selecting each element individually and applying these styles, but we're able to do it here with less code. And we can always override these defaults on individual elements. Like if we have our H1 style, we could change that to font family 2 here, but the defaults are set up at the top. So we're setting our defaults to our main font family, our lightest font weight, our tallest line height, a 0 letter spacing, and default text transform. Now, if we look at our design, our display H1 and H2 all have a different font family applied. So we could apply that to each individual element, or we could create another grouping just for those headings. So if we copy over our defaults, we can remove everything except our display H1 and H2, and we'll set that to font family 2. Font weight will still be 1, so that can just inherit from what's above. Line height will be the tightest line height. Letter spacing will be a tighter letter spacing, and we'll remove our text transform. So if we save that, we should notice now our display H1 and H2 all have a different font family. Now this design calls for 2 versions of an H2. They both share the same font size and line height, but the family and weight changes between the two. We could have used only this first style and just overrode the font family and weight whenever needed, but since this combination of styles was used often enough, we made a secondary H2 style. So in Webflow, we can just duplicate our H2. We can change this to say FS 2.1. We'll change this to be H2.1, and then we'll change the class on our element to be FS 2.1. So our selector here is targeting any class that has FS2 anywhere in the class name. So this letter spacing and line height we're applying to FS2 will also apply to FS 2.1 since it starts with the same first 3 characters. So same for our FS2 font size here, it'll also apply to FS 2.1, and we only need to change what we want to be different about 2.1. So anytime we're typing a period in the class name, Webflow converts that to a dash. So this is how we'll target FS 2.1. It can have the same font size, the same line height, and letter spacing as FS2, and we only want to change its font family and weight. So we'll go ahead and add this in here. It will be font family 1 and it'll be font weight 2. And once we save that, we should notice FS 2.1 now has a different style. So all we have left to do is set our font sizes. On our display heading here, it has a font size of 128 pixels. To figure out the rem equivalent, we would just divide that by 16, and that is 8 rem. So if we jump over to Webflow, if we try and set a font size here, it's not actually going to do anything because the font size is being set in the embed. So if we want a visual preview, we can just add a combo class, and that allows us to override the FS0. We'll see what 8 rem looks like on desktop, and that looks good. Maybe on tablet, we decide to back it down to 6 rem, and that's fine. On the next breakpoint, we'll do 5, and on the last breakpoint, let's do 4 rem. So that looks good. I think once we set that's a good hierarchy, we can remove the combo and go ahead and set it in the embed once we're ready. So at the top of the embed are all our font sizes here. We'll set our display to be 8 rem, and then we get to see how they're all looking there. We'll go ahead and check it out on tablet. We want to set that to 6 rem for the display there. On landscape, we'll change it to 5, and then on portrait, it can still be 4. So what's nice about this is we get to make sure that each size is smaller than the one before it in a nice visual preview, and we also see which sizes we decide to change on other breakpoints. Like here, we didn't change anything for the H4 on landscape, but if we did decide to do that, we could change it here and just make sure it's smaller than the other sizes. So that's a high-level overview of how to use the Lumos typography system. Clone the style guide in the description below to get started, and check out this next video on using Lumos.